What is up, guys? This is All the Smoke on Strength Physique with your hosts, Adam and Chris, where we provide you with evidence-based information, community support, and recognition to all who are bettering themselves with fitness.
Welcome back to All the Smoke on Strength Physique. We got the one and only Dr. Martinez, a very special guest, an individual that has been in my life for almost 6 years now, and it's been cool to have you as a professor, a mentor, and I like to call you a friend for sure. And I've always appreciated your practical side of things, and not something or someone that always goes by the textbook, but again has a lot of hands-on experience. And I think that is taken for granted, especially in the science, exercise science field. So, Dr. Martinez, for those individuals who have no idea who you are, could you please go ahead and introduce yourself, sir?
Well, thank you for the brief introduction. Very kind of you to show that you experienced some good, positive things with me in the classroom. It was great having you in the classroom, Adam, and Chris. Thank you for having me with you guys today. So, as Adam mentioned, my name is Nick Martinez. I'm an instructor at the University of South Florida, and I teach both undergraduate and graduate courses there, and also do a little bit of research and some training on the side with combat athletes. And I have experience training other athletes as well, in addition to just general population. But really my primary focus outside of the university when it comes to training and my passion is sort of the combat sport realm. When I have a fight date, it's sort of exciting for me and gets me motivated and moving in the direction to get guys ready for battle. So that's what kind of inspires me on the training side of things. But I sort of get that same feeling being in the classroom, right? And it's maybe even a little bit better or equal on some days, depending on the day, depending on the content. There's some days where, as both of you guys, I'm sure, were doing presentations throughout your academic career, although it could be a little bit nerve-wracking sometimes when you overcome that challenge. It's very rewarding to speak about things that you're passionate about and have others learn in the process. And so sometimes I get that same adrenaline rush in the classroom. But outside of that, that's pretty much sums me up, man. I'm a teacher, I'm a trainer, and that's pretty much what I do.
What is the biggest thing that got you into combat sports?
Yeah, so growing up, I was always physically active, as most kids are, and played a lot of baseball and was involved just in watching a lot of boxing. I often just mention that I grew up in a Cuban household, so it was all baseball and boxing every day. That was pretty much my education in sports. We watched other sports and we played other sports, but that was our bread and butter. And so growing up, I always had an affinity for boxing and for the sport. And as I got a little bit older, got more involved in sparring and getting my hands dirty a little bit in the sport itself, and just learning some of the tricks of the trade, business side of it, and just the physical side of it as well. So kind of grew up in that environment, and then it just manifested as I got older to actually working with the athletes.
Yeah, and you mentioned both the physical side, but I think one of the topics that we want to get into is the mental side and how a lot of people don't really keep that in mind. And I wrestled, which is nothing like boxing or any other combat sport. I mean, I guess it's similar, but I can only imagine what MMA fighters go through, because wrestling was just so tiring. But mentally, what is mental toughness in that sport even? And I guess how can you train for it? It's something that I've heard or seen a lot lately is we focus on mental toughness. We focus on improving the mental side of the sport, and give us your approach on it.
Yeah, so I would say that the sport of wrestling is very similar to MMA and training for MMA. You see a lot of wrestlers, obviously their ground game, they bring that into the sport. So a lot of the training components are similar. With boxing, it's a little bit different because you're on your feet, right? So if you take a boxer into the MMA ring, you're going to have scenarios to where maybe they don't know how to isometrically hold and breathe properly. And so they start to fatigue a whole lot quicker than you would because you have that knowledge and that foundation, right? But the two sports, whether we're talking wrestling or even to boxing, it could be classified as a combat sport. Relative to the mental toughness aspect of it, we would say that boxers really undergo a very similar process in terms of their training for mental toughness as any other sport. It is a competition. They need to be fierce competitors in the sense that they need to be able to deliver punishment, and they need to be able to withstand punishment as well. And we would say that that's really what separates boxers from other athletes, even some other combat athletes. Although we think of combat sports such as football, and there's most definitely pain involved in it, the pain in boxing is a little bit different, right? To where you're getting punched repeatedly in the face or in the body. And hopefully you're a good enough boxer to where you're not getting punched repeatedly in the face or in the body, but it does happen. You have to be able to withstand that punishment and deliver it at the same time. And another aspect of mental toughness for boxers is when you're delivering that punishment, is you have to be able to say, well, I see the individual is hurt, they're struggling, they're suffering. You can't really be too kind-hearted in those moments. You have to capitalize on the opportunities, take advantage of them, and it's a hurt business. And so you have to be able to want to hurt the opponent. And at the end of the day, it's all love, but in between the fight and the end of the fight, there's no love given. You show no love.
I think we lost Adam as well, but so mental toughness, what courses do you teach at USF? I know stress management is one, correct?
Yeah, so at the undergraduate level, I teach a course called stress management, but it's more related to cardiometabolic issues that can manifest from being exposed to stressors, right? As we say, everything is a stress. And so at the graduate level, I do teach a course called Mental Performance and Stress Management, which gets away from all the chronic cardiometabolic stuff and focuses primarily on strength and conditioning, right? And general population improving their mental toughness for sport and exercise. It's not an exercise psychology class. It's definitely more related to mental performance and mental toughness. But we combine the two concepts of mental performance and stress management, because when you start to look at those two terms, what you see is that they're defined in a very similar way, right? So when we think of mental toughness as your ability to overcome challenges despite the adversity in front of you, and then with stress management, it's your ability to cope with the demands of activities of daily living and just everyday life. And so there we see there's a lot of similarities between those two definitions, and your ability to cope with demands and overcome challenges is really mental toughness and stress management.
Yeah.
And so you won't find that too much to where people define them in a similar way, but they are the same concepts at the end of the day.
Yeah. For mental toughness, what are some, I guess, key ideas or key theories one should keep in mind, or like some simple, like for example, if you're trying to improve your physique, a very key thing to keep in mind is you should eat more protein. You should eat higher protein. For mental toughness, I guess disregarding the sport, what are some like key things that are really beneficial? Because I wasn't in your course for that one, but I think it's extremely important, and I think a lot of athletes can benefit from it.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that I discuss relative to boxing can be extrapolated to every other sport and everyday life. And when we think of all the idioms or analogies that are used in everyday life, we see that they actually point back to boxing in a lot of ways. And in the classroom, I'm sure Adam has heard me say this quite a bit, but boxing is life, and life is a fight in a lot of ways, right? And so we hear these idioms a lot, such as you get knocked down, what do? Well, you get back up, right? And sometimes when your back's against the ropes, you gotta slip and roll with the punches. Okay. Sometimes people give you a low blow, right? And you have to be able to respond in an appropriate way. So there's all these kind of analogies that we hear in everyday life, and also just in sport itself, whether it's football, whether it's bodybuilding, doesn't matter what it is. You often hear boxing terminology being used, you know. So I like to kind of preface it with that. Do we have Adam back on with us?
Yes, I think we do.
Okay. Are you losing me or no? Is my
No.
audio good and my video is good?
No, your video and audio is good. I think it was just on Adam's end.
Okay. So I kind of prefaced it with that boxing is life. You know, life is a fight kind of concept. So it can be extrapolated to other sports as well, daily life. But in academia, we say that mental toughness can be broken down into really these 4 or 5 concepts, which is control, challenge, commitment, confidence, and coping. And there's coping, there's stress management, right? And this is the whole academic kind of side of things. And to try to break that down into a very practical way can be a difficult task, right? So when we think of control, this is like your emotional and life control, your faith in yourself, right? And your ability to influence outcomes of things that happen in life. And then with challenge, it's like we talked about that definition of mental toughness, being able to face adversity and overcome the challenge. And commitment is, you know, being determined, persistence, think tenacity, right? I often use a concept. I haven't used it in boxing, but I remember using it with a high level tennis player to try to get them to conceptualize mental toughness was the FIT principle, and not the FIT principle that we're accustomed to, such as FITT, but just FIT. And the last part of the T was tenacity, to try to have the individual, the athlete, remember to always be tenacious in their approach, commitment, right? Be a fierce competitor. Confidence is the last one. And so that's your ability to achieve success in that area of sport. And really that could be general life as well, because when we're talking about specific sport, that's more self-efficacy, right? So just overall confidence. And then that last one is coping, which is really just stress management, right? So when we think of that, those, to try to break that down with an athlete in a short period of time, that could be a very challenging task, as I said. So we kind of back away from that, although we teach that in the classroom, and some of this stuff may come up, and it does come up naturally, organically in the training process. I do try to focus more on a practical side of mental toughness, which is really just what you mentioned, Chris. You mentioned that you hear a lot of people saying, focus on mental toughness, focus on the sports psychology aspect of it. So that term focus is really the first part of mental toughness, your ability to maintain focus on something, right? So if you're the opponent in front of me, I need to be able to maintain focus on you, right? Now there's specific things that I need to be looking at as a boxer. Maybe I shouldn't be looking specifically at your eyes. Maybe it's more related to your shoulders, and I'm focused on where the movement is being telegraphed from, because the eyes can be deceiving in that particular sport. So whatever the sport may be, you're focused on what it is you're supposed to be paying attention to, right? And when you pay attention to things, you have to be careful what you pay attention to, because you're purchasing that experience with your most valuable currency, which is time. So if you're being distracted with things, right, you're going to get caught slipping. So you have to make sure that you're paying attention. You're focused on the task at hand. And then the second part is your ability to act on that attention, right? Your ability to not just act. When I say action, a lot of times people think, well, reaction, that kind of goes with action, reaction. But a reaction is not always the best method or the best route that we're looking for. Sometimes a reaction is a poorly developed habit, right? So a reaction can be something that's unfavorable. We prefer a response, right? A response to something that you're paying attention to. So your attention and your action at the end of the day really constitutes mental toughness. And that's a good starting point with individuals.
I think how you explain that is phenomenal. How I am interpreting it as one should coach it. It's not so much like something you can preach as a textbook form, but perhaps your methodology of how you approach training and this this might look like if I'm training a baseball player, the second they come to the weight room, they're focused. Like they better not be on their phone. They better be not distracted, eliminating outside distractions. Like it is game time and they need to focus on training. Is it more so methodology and coaching versus like teaching someone? I guess in that aspect, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think it's highly dependable on the individual as well. So some guys are just naturally like they show up and they find their sweet spot. They're ready to work, and it's an easy task to train them. And then there's other individuals that they're on their phone, they're distracted all the time. And to be able to observe that and recognize that and tweak it in such a way that you can kind of minimize those habits, I think that's where a good coach comes into play. Because at the end of the day, whether you're an exercise physiologist working with general population, trying to improve their body composition and get a little bit of weight loss and improve their health, or if you're working with a high performing athlete, right, you have to be able to modify behavior. At the end of the day, that's what coaches are. They're behavior modifiers in a sense. And so you have to be able to get into the individual's headspace and motivate them, inspire them. Otherwise, you're just the average run-of-the-mill trainer. So I would agree with that minimizing those distractions is key, because distraction is the killer of performance. If I'm distracted every 5 seconds, I'm going to keep catching a punch, right? Going back to the boxing concept. If I'm distracted, I'm not going to be hearing what the coach is telling me from the corner. I'm actually listening and distracted to everyone else and what they're saying. So yeah, distraction is the killer of performance. And this is where we get into the concept, Chris, of playing in the moment, right? So if you're thinking about the point you just lost, or thinking about how I'm going to get that point back, right? And you're not playing in the moment, you're not responding, right, to the attention that you're giving, you're not responding to the stimuli, then you're not playing in the moment, and you're likely being distracted by the past or the future.
I think that is a great example that a lot of people that can connect with, because a lot of the times it was I forget the name of the course, but it was the only psychology course that I was required to take a part of my track, exercise and health psychology or sport psychology.
It may have been sports psych.
Yeah, exercise and sports psych, or just it was sports psych. And that was something that they were really trying to focus on, was if there was a bad thing that happened, if you missed a play, like getting that thought out, focus on like, yeah. Okay, if you missed a rebound or if you missed a three, like think about how you're the fastest one that can get back to play defense. Or
I think Dr. Martinez too, like the one of my best phrases that I've ever heard is the best athletes have the shortest memory. Like if you screw up, it's not about focusing on what just happened. It's focusing on, hey, the next play, and then the next play, and then the next play, or the next shot. Those individuals that have the shortest memory and can forget about the past and just focus on the present play, those individuals are easily separated.
And I like that. I like that concept. And I think that comes natural to some people. And to others, it may be more difficult to kind of get back to that. Oh, I'll just brush it off and keep going, right? Some people, they stay stuck in the past, or how to get the point back. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what kind of techniques or what kind of strategies are you utilizing for yourself, for your clients, or even individuals that are in the classroom? How are you trying to instill that within them? If you had a bad test score, hey, it's not the end of the world. You still got 3 of them. Or, hey, like you said, maybe you missed a serve. What are you trying to maybe paraphrase or put that in their mind that, hey, it's not about what happened before. It's about the next play or what's going on that you can control right now.
Yeah. So I do that in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's, at the beginning of a session. Sometimes it's at the cool down of a session. Intertwined with training, I will definitely incorporate certain things to try to improve mental toughness, right? And try to improve on habits and produce favorable habits and try to get rid of the negative habits. So there's that aspect of the training part of it. I think a coach should be including these mental toughness concepts on the daily in their training sessions. I use these podcasts sometimes and send the link to them and say, listen to this one. So that way I don't have to spend time lecturing individuals on mental toughness when I know that someone may need it. I tell them, or not necessarily even need it, but just will help optimize their approach to the game. So, well, check this out. Listen to this and tell me what you think about it. And so we plant the seeds through the teaching process, right? You guys having the podcast here, you're teachers now. You're out there teaching the world. So, and that's what we do as exercise scientists. We teach. Whether we're training individuals, we're still teaching them at the end of the day. So I like to use the academic side of things and still deliver content to them in an educational way, but also incorporate it into the training process.
No, I totally agree with all of what you just said, that we're educators and even coaches, right? We're just trying to take an athlete to an individual's place that they haven't been able to take themselves. But I think you made a really good point that, right, you try to instill some type of environment that we can control, but sometimes the athlete's only with us maybe 1 to 2 hours a day. Not really sure how frequently you are with your athletes, being in boxing and MMA and stuff like that. But what type of environmental cues are you trying to instill in the athlete as well to help them when they're not with you?
So more kind of academic research side of things. And this really isn't, this could be very applied as well. But sometimes I'll take individuals into the lab and put them on a device known as the NeuroTracker. I think you're familiar with the NeuroTracker, right? So you have this 3D space and you're supposed to track objects over time and you're supposed to keep attention to it and act on it. So we use that. But then in addition to that, sometimes we'll provide a stimulus such as, a Bluetooth speaker and put on some heckling, right, in the background to try to get them distracted. Or sometimes I'll interject and do certain things to try to throw them off their game, right? And try to get them to break their attention. So we do that in the lab using kind of background noise and audience kind of noise, crowd noise as a distraction. So that's one academic way of doing things in the lab that we've done. But you see this being done in practice football stadiums, right? So they'll blast over the crowd, boos and things like that to try to get that element, to create that environment for individuals. So that way, when they experience it, it's not completely new to them. Same concept as driving a car. So the first time, Adam or Chris, that you drove a car, it was likely a pretty challenging experience and you didn't know how much gas to give, when to pump the brakes properly, how much to turn the wheel. It could be a bit of a challenging task at 15 years of age, 16 years of age, right? So once you do that a few times, then you're starting to gain confidence in that space, right? You've been exposed to that stress. You've been exposed to that stimulus. Nowadays, you drive from here to Orlando and you forget everything in between. You were blasting the radio. You were talking on the phone. You were checking Facebook, Instagram, whatever, which you shouldn't be doing, but you did all that and navigated your way through traffic and didn't even remember any of it because it wasn't even stressful for you because you've done it so much. It's second nature to you. And that's where we want to get athletes to, where it's second nature to them, that, oh, I've been here, I've done this. And there's always going to be those moments to where they haven't been there and they haven't done it. But we want to build that confidence within them to say, oh, this is new, but I have enough self-efficacy. I have enough confidence in this space to overcome the challenge, no matter what new thing is thrown at me.
So we keep mentioning like stress and stress in higher stress situations. What is a good, is that good? Do you want to decrease it? Is that something that you could possibly increase to help performance? Or what's your insight on stress and how it can impact performance?
Yeah, so it's a sweet spot type of situation, and it does depend on the activity. If I'm a sharpshooter, I don't want too much adrenaline, right? I don't want too much sympathetic nervous system activation. I should have the right amount, and I don't know what that amount is for a sharpshooter, but I would imagine there's some level. But I know that there is a lot of breathing and breath control and certain timing of pulling the trigger for a sharpshooter. So having too much sympathetic nervous system activation for that individual would be counterproductive, right? For a boxer that's getting ready to go put their life on the line, we can't have them too flat. We can't have them too rested up right before a fight to where they come out and their feet are heavy and they're not moving well. And we also can't have them with their knees shaking to where they don't feel their legs under them because they're too stressed out about what they're getting ready to go do, right? So there's a sweet spot within that sport, obviously. So there may be times that the coach notices, well, we need a little bit of movement because movement will ease tension a little bit. And so maybe they're hitting mitts, or maybe we do a dynamic warm-up to kind of ease some of that tension. Or the individual could be so lackadaisical that it's like, no, we need to pick the speed up. We need to increase their sympathetic nervous system activation. So there is a sweet spot. And I think it's important to be able to recognize what that is for your particular sport. Powerlifting, right? You have to be able to have a good amount of adrenaline going before you get under that bar. You can't be too flat. Now, what we don't want to do is have too much stress to where the mind, right, is being hijacked and fear is starting to overwhelm the individual. So with stress, there's typically fear. But when we can control that fear, right, when we could reduce the amount of spiraling out of control that the mind is being hijacked from the sympathetic nervous system activation, when we can control that, now we have a superpower. We're jacked up and we're focused. And that's what we want within that sweet spot.
So a big control of responding to stress is, of course, it sounds like the nervous system and being able to identify how you should tailor your nervous system, but also it goes back to the mental toughness side, which is really just trying to stay focused, controlled, and some of the other, what were the other ones? You said focus, controlled.
Yeah. So the practical side would really just be focusing on those two of focus and responding.
Responding. Right? Yeah. Instead of reacting.
Yeah.
Which I think
instead of reacting.
Yeah. Which is really beneficial. What are some tasks that you can, or some things you can implement to help in, obviously, like timeouts, but like how can you coach someone to respond to stress better or realize what is going on with their body and that they need to either dial it back or dial it forward? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So yeah, totally. So there's two parts of the stress response, right? And so there's a stress model that you can kind of conceptualize, which is like you have this initial stimulus, right? That stimulus then results in some perception of that situation. You perceive it either favorably or unfavorably. That's where we kind of have that eustress or distress response. From there, you have an emotional response, either good or bad. And then you have a physical response, and then ultimately you have an outcome to that, right? But there's two ways of addressing this stress response, and it would be physiologically and psychologically. So physiologically, we can consider breath work, right? So breathing techniques that can reduce sympathetic nervous system activation, or breathing techniques that can induce a sympathetic nervous system response, whatever is needed for that particular individual at that particular time. Most of the times we're talking about reducing the stress response though, right? So just a basic 5 second in, 5 second out, 3 second in, 3 second out breathing protocol can reduce the stress response. In addition to that, we use breath holds. And so that can really lower the heart rate very quickly. And when we do breath holds for 5 to 8 seconds and we do certain repetitions of those, that can kind of bring the individual out of that state of fear. So they do a few repetitions of breath holds and they come out of that situation or that rep scheme and they're like, oh, wow, I totally forgot what I was just even thinking about or what I was concerned with, right? So it can help in that way. And then the physical stuff can be, that is sort of physical. It plays into the mental, but we can also have this, relaxation response, such as autogenic training, to where individuals are doing certain techniques, whether it's contracting and relaxing certain muscle groups, and they go through the whole body to try to have this physical relaxation response, induce that response. So there's those ways in the physical realm, right? And then within the psychological realm, it's really a trick of getting the individual to kind of get back into that moment, playing in the moment, not thinking about the past, not thinking about the future. But when we do have those negative thoughts, to recognize that it's our friend showing up to show us, hey, this is the worst case scenario, right? Whatever that worst case scenario is, whether it's in football, whether it's in powerlifting, whether it's in soccer, whether it's in bodybuilding or boxing, doesn't matter. In everyday life, whatever the worst case scenario is, we don't want to dwell in that space. To dwell is like a home. A dwelling is a home. And when you dwell with thoughts, you're making that part of your essence. And you don't want to sit there with those thoughts, because ultimately you're going to create that experience, right? So you can thank that thought for being present and showing you what the worst case scenario is, but you need to shift out of that and get back into the moment of something positive and wanting to perform at the highest level.
You had made a comment on one of the books that I had read quite some time ago. It was called The Upside of Stress. And it very frequently, when I was reading that book, it brought me to a couple of your lectures in stress management, how, right, if a negative thought comes into mind, thank that thought, appreciate that thought, and understand, right, your body's response to this thought or this stress is priming you for whatever is about to happen. But I think a lot of individuals, we're taught that stress is bad, or we're taught that we need to shift down that response. And in essence, that could actually have a negative downplay to what we're about to happen. But I think a lot of this is, right, almost an experience range is, right. The more exposure I get to it, as you said, the more and more I get comfortable being uncomfortable, the more likely I'm going to be successful in whatever situation you have. And I think that is what true confidence brings. But I've always asked you this question. What are your thoughts of purposely giving an individual, I guess, a challenge that they might not be successful in, just to, again, put them in that uncomfortable situation and see how they respond after the fact?
Yeah. So experiencing failure, whether it's underneath a bar or whether it's in a agility task, or in some type of competition, it builds character, right? So I think it's an important part of developing the individual's character, because at the end of the day, your character is what's most important. So your ability to celebrate your wins, and also to recognize where you can improve and adjust from your losses is a game changer, right? So the individual who's negative and is always kind of siding toward, oh, well, that was so-and-so's fault and this, that, and always making excuses rather than adjusting, owning it, right, and improving their situation from that, they're not going to optimize their performance if they're always making excuses. So I like the idea of not necessarily experiencing failure for in a repetitive routine type of way, but to get touches with those experiences is important. That's how we build confidence. Just going back to the driving experience, we've made a lot of mistakes, right? We probably hit a few cars along the way, maybe a mailbox or two. Hopefully we don't do that anymore, because we've kind of experienced those losses. What's that? Crystal does?
Yeah, his license was suspended for, I think, the whole master's degree, because he hit quite a few mailboxes, but we're all good now.
Which I don't get. I didn't hit it with my car. I hit it with a baseball bat, but whatever. Anyway,
that's a different story.
Yeah.
Different conversation.
You don't do that in Florida, Chris.
Huh?
You don't do that in Florida, Chris.
Oh yeah, that's a Michigan thing. My bad.
But I think Dr. Martinez, one of the biggest, or one of the more phrases that always stuck with me the first time I sat in one of your lectures was, once you're able to understand life is hard, that takes care of itself. But when an individual, or let's say like an individual has yet to kind of build character, as somebody is still stuck in the trenches and not able to get out, and you've done almost everything you can do or thought you could have done for that individual, what, in your experience, what is next for that individual? Are you kind of almost saying, sitting down and talking and say, hey, this is what's happened, this is what we tried, what's going on? Or are you just kind of just letting go and they'll figure it out eventually? Because we've always have those clients that, right, we can't do the work for them as much as we want it. We can't want it as bad or more than the individual that has to work. But what are you trying to instill, or after numerous times of maybe delivering the same message just in a different way, what are you, I guess, what's the next step that you would take?
So with someone that has grasped the techniques well and they're doing well with it, or they seem to be struggling with it, which one?
Yeah, we've continuously tried to portray a message, maybe in 3 different ways, but they still can't grasp it. And now I guess we are at loss for him. What approach would you take from that individual?
Yeah. So I like that you remembered the concept of life being hard. And once we accept that universal truth that life is hard, it becomes easier, right? And not the sense that it's a downhill ride, but we become more efficient with it. That experience that we have with recognizing that life is hard, we're able to kind of navigate these waters more economically. And so I love that you remember that and brought that up. That's actually from the Road Less Traveled book, right? So I always carry that with me. And I typically preface that with a lot of guys in the mental toughness training aspect. And obviously that's an everyday type of life situation that people should be grasping right now, that life is hard. It is hard. And nobody said it was going to be easy. And once we recognize that, we become more efficient with navigating those waters again. And I think that's extremely important because we live in a society nowadays which tends to be very weak, right? And so we need to strengthen our character. We need to strengthen our mental toughness. That concept of vitamin grit, which I often use, right? So individuals, to get back to your question, that maybe are not grasping they're not taking what we're putting out, right? They're not really hearing it. And we've kind of tried multiple ways. Maybe we're not the coach for that individual. So sometimes it just may not be the chemistry between you and that individual may not be there. You may just not be the person for them for whatever reason. So sometimes a change in environment can help with an individual and inspire them to kind of get back on track if they're an athlete, and we need to make sure that they're competing at a high level. So we have to recognize when it's time to withdraw and say, well, go find someone else, and not have that affect our ego as well. Does that kind of answer part of it?
Yeah, I think
that reminds it very well. In some aspects, I think that's why an assistant coach is very important, or just having a circle of individuals that you can kind of refer to maybe just hear it or be able to relate it a little bit better for that individual. So finally, maybe it clicks. But I think you hit it on the head too. For me personally, or whoever the main coach may be, to not take it personally, because we might just not bond well, or we just might not be a great fit for each other, just had any relationship.
Yeah, and I think part of it too, if I've exhausted my resources for the mental and the physical side, I do consider some of the spiritual aspects of sport, because in sport you have to play. A lot of sports psychologists will say you have to play in the spirit, meaning, depending on how you're doing today, you could be in good spirits, you could be in bad spirits, you could be in meh kind of spirits, right? Hopefully when you're competing, you're in high spirits, you're at a high level, you feel good. Affective valence is high, right? So individuals that maybe are not playing in the spirit, or when they're training, they don't seem to be in good spirits, they could be undergoing something known as cognitive dissonance. So they may be showing up and they may be saying, yeah, dude, I'm ready to work. But in reality, they're not, right? So their actions don't match what their belief or what their vision is. They may have a vision, they may have an idea of what they want to do in their sport, but their actions are not matching that. And so that's where people are actually encountering a spiritual problem known as cognitive dissonance. That can happen in sport, it can happen in life. So I do try to kind of recognize that as well. And if that's happening, and have those deeper conversations with individuals on how to kind of respond to that.
Do you have any other further questions on that topic, Adam?
No, I just would want to hit on a point that I think going into that conversation with your client or player will open up a better relationship with them, because it shows them that you just don't care for them as a player or as that individual that's trying to get a dub. And hopefully after that conversation, that relationship takes on another challenge and is able to bond and succeed elsewhere. But I think that's a really great point, that you always have to understand what the outside environment is going on for whomever you're associated with.
Something go ahead, Dr. Martinez, before I go into that.
It was really nothing of substance. I was just going to say also having that conversation can open up, as Adam says, a box of worms.
A box of worms. Yeah, that was a weird phrase. My bad, y'all.
That's going to be one that we continue to reference. I'm never going to let that one go.
I like it.
But programming considerations, going more so on the actual physical training side, what are some major program considerations for fighters? Or obviously all training is very sport specific, but I think I can speak for me and Adam on this, where we neither one of us have focused on fighters for programming.
Relative to programming for an athlete, for a boxer, you were saying, combat athlete?
Yeah. And what are just some like key things? I guess, is it considered a rotational sport? I guess depending on the sport, boxing versus like more of an MMA approach, there's going to be a lot more groundwork. So you might have to take a different training style. Is footwork something that's big a part of it? Or what are some key principles a part of the training?
Yeah. And so here's where, again, I think you can kind of get into almost any sport where boxing can carry over to any sport, because you can have an individual where you cross train into boxing, right? A lot of times football players will cross train into boxing. A lot of other sports will do that as well, right? Do you hear the dog barking? Yeah, it's gonna be a problem.
It's not that bad though. It's not that bad. Trust me, we've had cats, we've had tons of different animals, and my dog is always making a mess around with me right now. So,
okay. All right. So what I like to do is consider whether it's a boxer, whether it's a power lifter, whether it's a soccer player, general population, it doesn't matter. I like to view the body as a machine, right? And I like to look at that machine and what are the biomechanical and what are the bioenergetic demands of that particular sport. So understanding what those demands are, because that demand is a stress. That stress results in some type of adaptation. So looking at what are the most favorable ways to facilitate the adaptation that we want? What kind of stress can we give the individual? What's needed, right? So I like to look at it from that perspective. This is where my philosophical approach, anyone's philosophical approach to training sort of begins. How are you looking at the athlete? How do you want to train them? My academic side says, well, take biomechanics with me in the classroom and do a kinesiological analysis on your favorite sport, because then you're going to dive into that realm and reality of that particular sport and what the demands are for it, right? And so doing a needs analysis for the sport is important as well. So looking at the body as a machine, what are the demands of it? I like to consider our exercise science laws. So Wolff's law, Davis's law, right? So how bone and muscle will remodel based on its imposed demand. Adam probably is tired of hearing me say that in the classroom. Your SAID principle, right? So specific adaptations to imposed demand. Although we can cross train into other areas, we should be training athletes within the realm that they're competing in, right? If it's a shot putter, maybe I shouldn't be bowling with them on a daily basis to train that particular movement pattern. And then there's also the whole concept of safety, effectiveness, efficiency. So considering that a safe athlete, if our training programs are safe and keeping them from injury, well, we're doing our job, because an injured athlete isn't a competing athlete, right? And in the sport of boxing, that's typically why they're being brought to us, is because they're trying to offset all the sparring that's been done throughout history in the sport to really get the individual's fitness up to where it needs to be. A lot of sparring is done, but 70% of the injuries in that sport come through sparring, both musculoskeletal injuries and brain injuries. So we try to avoid that, right, as much as possible and offset that, or at least that's where the sport is going now. Some guys, they still love gym wars, right? And they love to go in there and get their hands dirty with sparring, but you take damage each time. Those are mini car accidents that you encounter each time you step into the ring. So you have to be cognizant of that. And then obviously the fit principle, right? So frequency, intensity, time, and type, and how we're training those individuals, considering those variables.
So growing up, I was always under the consideration of having to make weight, right? And that's something that you experience with all the time with your fighters, I'm sure. And even powerlifters, everyone needs to focus on their weight for specific weight classes. However, with what you just said, one of the biggest program considerations is injury prevention and making sure the athlete is safe. We'll go into like different water cutting protocols, but like how does the nutrition side ultimately impact these individuals that need to actually fuel themselves? For example, like drinking water like consistently. However, you're trying to make weight, you're taking water away, like you're trying to actually get it out of your body. So like, how are these things conflicting, or what are some best methods? Because like I said, when I was younger, my parents didn't have a strength coach for me. So what they did for me was, okay, I'm going to trash bag, do the old fashioned method, start chewing on gum, spitting, not eat for a day, and just keep going to the bathroom, et cetera, try to get all the water out. What do you see fighters doing now for like best practices? Is it the same thing?
Well, it still varies. In the sport of boxing, you still have the individuals that have their time-tested methods, right, versus the newer school of thought and some of the science that's out there relative to weight cuts and water cuts. So depending on the training camp, depending on the head trainer, which we call, the captain, they're the captain of the ship. So sometimes they give you full autonomy to say, okay, we'll go ahead and do this with the fighter. Whereas other times they're like, no, this is how I've always done it, and this is how it's going to be done. And so when you have a captain that has had experience and built world champions, there ain't no way in heck you're going to question that captain's directive. But when you get the autonomy to do it and you feel comfortable that your protocol is safe, effective, and efficient, well, then you implement it, right? And so there's definitely the old school ways of doing things. Like you mentioned, the sauna suit, which I hate, not a fan of.
No, it was terrible, man. Like looking back at it, I don't know why I would do it. Like I lived in Michigan, so I guess Florida weather is way worse. But like, whoever thought like, let's put a trash bag on and go for like a 3-mile run? Like that does not sound fun. Like,
so it's not fun. And there's times where I've had athletes that have used it, obviously boxers that have used it. Not the trash bag, but the actual sauna suit. It's almost like a wetsuit material, just a whole lot thicker. And so they've been accustomed to doing it, and I've allowed them to do it. Well, not allowed them to do it. I don't encourage them to do it, but if they feel comfortable in a camp, sometimes I don't like to create everything new under the sun, especially when you step into a new environment with an athlete. You want to kind of incorporate some of the things that they've been doing because it makes them feel comfortable. There's some familiarity there. But the sauna suit is, while it's effective for dropping water or dropping weight as well, it's dangerous, right? So one, it's dangerous, especially in Florida, to kind of carry that heavier load, right? And we live in a humidity bubble here, so we can get some really nice physiological adaptations out here in Tampa. So if you're a combat athlete and you want to train, come see me down here in Tampa, because we have a great humidity bubble and we get some good adaptations. But I'm not going to put you in a sauna suit, right? That's just not my thing. So one, it's dangerous. Two, there's potential decrements in performance, because when you overheat the system too close to competition, you're going to reduce central nervous system drive. So whether it's a sauna suit or whether it's a sauna, which I don't like saunas either, I don't use them. Sometimes the athlete will say, well, no, I feel comfortable doing it. I can't say that. I've used it once or twice, right? We have had to use it once or twice. But I always try to avoid it at all costs because I know that I'm going to get some central nervous system decrements out of it. And I don't want that, right? So the sauna suit, the spitting, that can be fine, right? So the spitting, the dump of water through Jolly Ranchers or gum or just spitting nonstop throughout the day, that can be somewhat helpful. I'm not anti that.
What are some other, or what is, if you have someone that's completely open to whatever method you're going to say, what water cutting protocol are you going to give for them to meet their weight class?
Yeah. So typically what's happening nowadays is whether it's MMA or whether it's boxing, guys will drop significant water weight to drop to a lower weight class and compete at that weight class. And the night before the fight, rehydrate and come in significantly larger than what they weighed in at the night before. The problem with that is that, well, one, everybody's doing it, right? So it's a situation of, well, whose method is better, who's not reducing their strength or power or central nervous system drive as much as the opponent is, depending on what they're doing. But then you may also have guys that compete in and around that weight class no matter what. They're kind of the rarity. So if I'm a 135er and I walk around at 140, right? And so all I have to do is lose a little bit of water weight, 5 pounds, versus someone that weighs 155 and they have to do a 20-pound water weight cut, right? And they're going through all that weight loss to do it. And there's a lot of hardship that they go through. What's happening to the body at that point, the organs of the body, the kidneys being taxed, each subsequent fight that they do that, they're losing all that water. That can be long-term, can be maladaptive to the system. It could be maladaptive short-term as well. So we have to consider those things.
Everyone's doing it. Everyone's losing weight. Some people are having to do it at a larger extreme than others, which of course they're going to see more decrements because of it. What is your recommendation for athletes to do in that situation then?
So as one is to not have to lose too much. So we like to stay between 5 to 10% of body weight, right? Like that's what's preferred. So you shouldn't be dropping really more than that. So that's a good starting point. And typically a camp is about 6 to 8 weeks, right? And so a 6 to 8 week camp to drop a few pounds of fat here and there, you're already starting within 5 to 10% of your weight class. And we want to obviously facilitate fat oxidation throughout the entire training camp. So that means eating a good amount of poly and monounsaturated fats, right? And so you're facilitating fat oxidation, you're eating more fat. And so we definitely like to do that in addition to the aerobic training part of things that will facilitate fat oxidation as well. So we like to lose the proper amount of fat and then whatever is needed at the end, have a small water cut. And the water cut, there's different ways of doing it, and not to get into too much of a prescription for water weight cuts here today. That's something that I kind of do more on an individual basis, and sometimes involve nutritionists when they need to be. But at the end of the day, hyperhydration is a form that's often used like a week out from the competition. So increasing water intake, and then after increasing water intake for a very short period of time, approximately a week out, we start to reduce the water intake each subsequent day thereafter, leading up until the day that you have to step on the scale and meet your contracted weight. So oftentimes you'll see guys to where maybe they're just having a small amount of water the day of the weigh-in, sipping on water, sipping on Pedialyte to ensure that their electrolyte balance is where it needs to be and they don't feel too much lethargy, right, going into competition.
Now, is it true that a lot of these combat sports are starting to test for water cuts, or they're starting to ban them? Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure about MMA, boxing, I have not been aware of any kind of promotional company or sanctioning body that's reducing water cuts. Now you do have medicals, right? The day before a fight and sometimes the day of a fight, to where they test your heart rate. They put you through a very short bout of exercise, and the individual needs to demonstrate that they're in good homeostasis, that their physiological measures are not all over the place. Doctors can recognize when something is awry, and they may not give you the green light to fight if they notice that you're severely dehydrated. So they check, right, for certain physiological measures, but I'm not aware of anything that would prevent an individual from doing a weight cut.
So that's something that I actually was about to ask as well, because like I said, I grew up wrestling, and another individual that's a strength coach, a friend of mine, they wrestled as well, but they wrestled in a different state. And where they wrestled at, they were actually required to get their what's the term I'm looking for? Their water level, their hydration percentage, or something that identified how hydrated they were going into the weigh-ins. And if they weren't meeting X amount of hydration at the weigh-in, it disqualified them for their weight. So that's actually interesting point that Adam brought up that I didn't think of until he said that. But it looks like with the major organizations, it doesn't seem like it's a thing yet, or maybe it won't be.
Yeah, I remember James, from our class, he had mentioned that they're starting to get a little more strict with that. And Dr. Martinez, was it last week or 2 weeks ago that the individual that was on UFC, he couldn't even walk to his scale. Like, he had to literally be carried to that. So what are your thoughts on that? Or is that just that a severe of a water cut that's what has led him to where he's at right now?
Yeah. So it's unfortunate when you see that happen. It could be a variety of things, and I'm not sure who that individual was or what the reason for them kind of fainting or falling out was. It could have been related to food deprivation. It could have been related to water deprivation. Could have been fear. I don't know, but we can assume that it was likely due to some type of deprivation of substance, right? Food or water. That's not a good sign relative to the training camp to get the individual prepared for that particular moment, because it kind of shows that they had to go through a severe cut. This is why you should have these kind of rules on the first day. Don't step into training camp 5 to 10% above your contracted weight, because you're going to have problems, right? So I think there's certain guidelines that need to be established. So the maintenance phase in between fights, the maintenance phase in between powerlifting competitions, because I've worked with powerlifting athletes as well for water cuts, primarily females, right? But nonetheless, I've worked in the sport. And that's always a fun sport to do water cuts for. I do them the same way. I do them for boxers. It's been a while since I did it for a powerlifting athlete, but they're fun because you get to see a different realm. And the 2 times that I've done it, I've actually had the individual hit their PRs, right? So it was a nice, rewarding kind of feeling.
At the end, I think at the end of the day, like you said, you be proactive in your approach, so it doesn't have to be so severe that it kicks your ass and you're not able to respond or be able to perform at that level that you need to be performing. Because I mean, I've had a negative consequence where I have had to drop 15 pounds, and that was just me being a butthead and playing around way before I should have. So you definitely experience the losses of the performance. So I think, like you said, the most important message from it is making sure you're proactive and setting yourself up or periodizing your nutrition leading up to your competition date for sure.
Yeah, nutritional periodization is an important concept that I think these athletes that compete year long need to conceptualize. It's not just, I take a break and I eat all this fast food and I drink all this these different beverages and then I start camp again. No, as long as you're an athlete, you're an athlete. You need to be maintaining properly, right? So that way you don't have to go through this grueling process every time. Again, these subsequent training camps in which individuals have to drop a significant amount of weight, tax their organs to make the contracted weight at the end of the training camp will ultimately result in some type of disorder or dis-ease for that individual in the long term. You could ruin your metabolic system by having these large weight fluctuations, right, throughout an entire career. We've seen it happen with individuals to where they just can't lose weight no more. I mean, they can lose weight, but it's not as efficient. Nowhere as efficient as it used to be. And as you get older too, that kind of draws challenges as well.
Another question though, following up, right, UK, you're 24 hours out, you've done the water cut, you've made your weight class. Now you have that 24 hours to just either, I guess, maybe eat like a butthole or, just like you said, eat at a sufficient amount of food. But what other aspects are you trying to prioritize those 24 hours out? Because, right, your goal, at least mine in particular, is, okay, let's become hydrated. Let's see how much weight we can kind of, replenish in due time. But what other aspects are you trying to pay attention to 24 hours out of competition after weigh-ins?
So there's a few, and that's actually one of the it's all fun. Like the weight cuts are all fun. But the rehydration is kind of and also a very fun period for me. Because I have my little tricks of the trade, right? I'm not going to reveal too much today, but maybe we'll work together. You could send some people my way and I can help them out, but I'll reveal a little bit of what I do. So I think it's important to consider when you're putting that weight back on, right, that you're actually moving that water through the compartments of the body and it's just not stagnant, right? You're leading up to competition. So for a power lifter, although you may not be going into the gym the night before, right? You're not going into the gym the night before a lift, are you? After you've rehydrated? No, you're not touching heavy weight.
No, I honestly, for me particularly, whenever I've done a water cut, or even the week out of a meet, the last 2 to 3 days that I have not trained. I'll hit openers maybe 2 to 3 days out. But other than that, I'm not touching weight again, because those last couple of days are usually pretty grueling in itself on the last couple of days of the water cut.
Yeah. So nonetheless, though, when you're doing a bench press or you're doing a deadlift or you're doing a squat, those are full body movements. Those are compound multi-joint movements, right? So it's going to require every part of your body to generate force from the toes to the top. Okay. Water is pulled out of bone whenever you do a water cut. That's why guys break their hands a lot of times, right? That's why the brain is in such a critical spot when these guys do water cuts, because they're moving compartments of water out of the body. And so when you put that water back in, you want to make sure that it's moving back into those compartments as well. So for a boxer, it's critical. It's critical to their health. For a powerlifting athlete, to me, it would, and I've advised this, and when I've worked with individuals, it tends to work out pretty well. I advise that they have some kind of dynamic movement. Not that they're going on long distance aerobic runs. We don't want to do that because you're going to decrease power. But maybe there's some kind of dynamic stretching protocol that an individual likes to do, or the coach likes to do, following intake of water, intake of food, to move, those electrolytes, to move that nutrition, to move that fluid throughout the body. So that's one thing to consider, right? Obviously, people have their supplementation protocols and things that they like to do to kind of, get ready for competition. And there's different things that can be considered there.
I think that's a common thing that you said, though, like the dynamic stretching, dynamic movements. I know from since I started my master's, something that I've noticed is doing like you said. I think that was the first time I've heard it put like that. is moving the nutrition through your body as needed. So specifically for bodybuilders, it's really important for you to properly peak so that your muscles are as full as possible. However, there's a lot of people out here like cycling water and doing all these things with electrolytes, when really it's just very important to keep the body in homeostasis so that you actually look how you should look. But simply doing very light full body exercising, like a full body circuit, very lightly, not where it's strenuous or hard or
nothing strenuous.
Yeah. But enough just to get the nutrients going to that muscle because you are using it. I think
100%.
I think that's a really good way that you put it. And I appreciate it, because now that I think is going to be a way that I explain it to people is just moving the nutrition through your body to make sure everything is in homeostasis.
I like that breakdown.
Yeah. Most importantly, though, we just wanted to say thank you for coming onto our podcast. Tell our listeners where they're able to find you or your coaching or your services.
Well, I'm in Tampa, so if you're ever in Tampa and you want to train, you could definitely hit me up. On Instagram, my professional page is Nick Mars PhD, so NICMARS PhD, and my professional page on Facebook is also Nick Mars PhD.
All right, and I appreciate that. Like we said, thank you for your time. I know it's sometimes busy, but if you're
appreciate both of you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. If you guys need this gentleman's help, he's extremely intelligent. If you're a fighter, if you're needing someone for water cutting protocols, reach out to him. He's a master, jack of all trades, master of all as well. Thank you. And that was All the Smoke with Dr. Martinez.